Alright, let's go into the first step, which is maintain object attributes. Select that step and click on the execute button. This is the step where you define your import method. So what's an import method? Here is your SAP system, and here is your flat file or whatever file with all the customer records, and you want to get them into SAP, right? Now, when you ask LSMW to pump them into SAP, the first question that it's going to ask you is, okay, which method do you want me to use to enter the data into SAP? Well, how many methods are there? There are 4 of them. So we're not going to worry about this little method here. So let's focus on these 3 things: batch input recording, BAPI, business application programming interface, and IDOC. Now, a customer can be created via any of these 3 methods. If you choose this batch input recording, the way that customer master is going to be created is you go to FD01 and enter the data manually, like the customer number, account group, customer name, customer address, reconciliation account, transportation zone, and click on save. That's the way you create data in the system manually, right? And batch input recording automates, or rather records, these exact sequence of steps and stores it in a recording. However, if you choose a method, say BAPI, it works in a slightly different way. A BAPI is a function or a function module, which is a bunch of code written by SAP where you give the parameters for creating the customer master, and the net result of it is the customer master is created. So you don't have to manually go and do the steps, but rather give the input and the SAP will run this piece of code and save the customer and create your output. That's a BAPI. An IDOC is another way in which you can create the same data in the system. An IDOC stands for intermediate document, which is used mostly in ALE and EDI. So if you are focusing your data input methods on ALE or EDI, IDOC is probably a good choice. If you are focused on speed, the more sophisticated way to do things, a BAPI is the right method. But nevertheless, a batch input recording is probably the most used method here in LSMW. Although a screen recording sounds very simplistic, there are a bunch of advantages to using this method. First thing is simple, meaning it's not complicated, right? You don't have to know BAPIs, you don't have to know IDOCs. You have a transaction, click, 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 record it, save it, and that's a recording. Second thing is, if you have a custom transaction, of course you're not going to have a BAPI for it. Of course you're not going to have an IDOC for it. A Z transaction. In that case, you're going to use a batch input recording as well. So this is going to be our focus for our LSMW training. Just go and click on this display change, select the batch input recording radio button, and just click on this button. You see a blank screen here. So go click on your new button and then say, I want to record customer underscore master, and give a description of customer master financial view, and click save. Now it will ask you for the name of the transaction code. We know we want to create a customer using FD01. So enter FD01 and then click OK. From this point on, your recording has started until you hit the last step or click on the save button. So just go ahead and start create your customer master like we have created in one of our previous videos. Enter a company code of 1000, account group 0001. Don't worry if you don't understand any of that stuff. Just focus on the fact that this is a transaction that has a series of steps, and in each step we might or might not enter a set of data. In this case, we have entered a company code and account group and click OK. We're moving on to the next screen. This is the second screen. So in this screen, we're going to enter the name of the customer, right? It remembered the name, Walmart Incorporated. And the search term is Walmart. The street is 1000 Denise Drive. The city is Edison. See, it remembers everything from the previous recording. And the postal code is 08820. The country is US. The language is English. Third screen, click on this button. Click. It says customers already found with the same address because we have created it previously, but that's fine. We know it. Click OK. And we don't want to fill anything here. We don't want to fill anything here. If something is not mandatory, you don't want to fill it in. If something is mandatory, just fill it up. Moving on, moving on, moving on, and on, and on, and on. In this screen, I know the recon account is mandatory because I have this checkbox. So select that and click on our 140000. Click next, click next, click next, click next, and LSMW has recorded our transaction. And you see these little pink or beige boxes here and a whole bunch of these technical fields. So what's happening here? What are these boxes and what are these different fields? Before I explain this, let me save this recording, go back, and you see that you have the recording cust_mast readily available here. Go all the way back, and in this step, go to the recording and then select cust_mast as the recording that we want to use. Now you can always go back to this button and then double click on this recording here and you go to this screen. Now before we move away from this screen, I want to explain a simple concept here. Now if you remember our recording, so we have typed in FD01 as our transaction code and it has opened up a bunch of screens. This was the first screen, this was the second screen, third screen, fourth screen, and so on until we hit the last screen and save. So in the first screen we have entered the company code 1000, company code 1000, and customer account group 0001. In the second screen we have entered the customer name, address, and so on. And then third screen, there were a couple of fields, but we did not enter anything there. The fourth screen, same thing. Maybe in the last screen, we entered a customer recon account. All these different fields that I'm going to mark in green, let's say, right, are the fields that we have entered as part of the recording. And that's what these fields are that are highlighted in pink. So what SAP is saying here is, okay, you have done your recording and you have entered these fields. Company code, right? Customer account group, right? And then name and address, and so on and on. I want you to visualize these little fields as hooks into the recording. So your recording has created these different hooks based on the data that you've entered, so that finally when you have this data of customers in your file that says, okay, customer number 1000, customer name Walmart, and then customer address so and so, customer recon account so and so. What LSMW is going to do is it's going to magically map these fields to these hooks in the way that you have asked it to. And this mapping is what we are going to do in step number 5. Right? So in step number 1, we are going to lay the foundation and create these hooks. And after step 2, 3, and 4, in step number 5, we are going to map the input data to these hooks so that the mapping of how the data needs to go in is being told to LSMW. So LSMW can understand how the data needs to go in to the system. Alright, so before we move away from this screen, there's one thing I want you to do. You have to give a name to these hooks or the data that you've entered. So double click on each of these fields like so and say name is Bookers, B-U-K-R-S. You might be wondering why such a weird name. I'm just copying this name from this field, B-U-K-R-S. And you can give a description here. It's company code. And click OK. And you have to do this thing for all the hooks that you want SAP to use for the recording. Okay, KTOKD, which stands for company code. Hit OK. And the next field is name. Double click. Name 1. And the description is customer name. And you'd have to do that for all the fields that you want to use as inputs for that recording. There you go. So through the magic of editing, I've given names for all these hooks: company code, customer name, search term, street, so on and so forth. Now you're ready to save this recording. Go back, and save it. So you have completed the first step, which is identifying the object attributes or identifying the import method. The second step is called the source structure. What's a source structure? Think of a source structure as an intermediary step between your file, the source file, and the target recording. So let me draw another picture here. So you have your customer file, right? Like this. .xls file or .csv file, whatever, with so many number of rows of customers, rows and rows and rows of customers. Let's say 10,000 customers, like I've done in my first project. And each row would contain customer number, customer name, customer address, and so on and so forth. You have recorded a whole bunch of screens for the customer master, starting here, ending here, and it has created a recording with a whole bunch of hooks. Customer number, customer name, company code, so on and so forth. You cannot directly map the fields over here to the recording. So this is the recording. And SAP wants you to create an intermediary structure with a bunch of fields that is used as an intermediary structure between your source file and the target recording. So each of these fields, let's say customer number is this guy, has to go through this structure and then into the recording hook. Same thing with the customer name. It has to go through this structure into the respective field in the structure, and this field will be passed over to the corresponding hook in the recording. Now you might be wondering why this structure is needed. The reason why SAP asks you to create this structure is very simple. This structure can be used for additional transformations. So what do I mean by that? Let me give you one simple example. Let's say you have a customer phone number here, okay? Let's say 732.000.000. That's how the data is. And before you enter the data into the system, you want to prefix a +1 to it for all US customers. How do you do that? Well, you can take the source field, pull it into your structure, and in the structure you can write a small rule that can transform the input data, which is the standard US phone number, and attach a prefix to it called +1, and then push it through to the recording hook. This is a very simple example of a transformation that can happen in the structure. There could be more complex transformations that could happen, and the reason why an intermediary structure is created is to ensure that you can do additional massaging of the data or transformations on this data before it's ultimately poured in to the recording. So let's go ahead and create a structure. So select the maintain source structures radio box and click on the execute button. Again, click on the change button and click on the new button and say cust_fin or the finance view, and give a description that says customers financial view structure and click OK. Now that's it. That's all you want to do in this step. Just create a source structure and save it.